This is 50 Shades of Green by Climate Group, your monthly climate podcast exploring all the essential news and views from the US and around the world. I'm Phil Kehoe. Today, we're looking back at the US Climate Action Summit. What happened and how we're carrying this progress forward from the week. First, Climate Group's Executive Director for North America, Angela Barranco, will join with Antonieta Cadiz Vargas, Deputy Executive Director of Climate Power and Acción, for the inside scoop on the U.S. Climate Action Summit's flagship event, the Leaders Forum, and how partnerships and engagement are forging a better future for Latino communities in climate action. Then, Adam Lake speaks to Seema Wadhwa, Executive Director of Environmental Stewardship at Kaiser Permanente, on the U.S. Climate Action Summit's first ever Climate and Health Day, and how healthcare companies are adapting to new paradigms and the connection between climate change and healthcare. What role does the Latino community play in shaping the green transition? Climate Group's Executive Director for North America, Angela Barranco, joins with Antonieta Cadiz Vargas, Deputy Executive Director of Climate Power and Acción, to discuss how to mobilize Latinos for climate action and a fairer, cleaner, and healthier economy. Angela and Antonieta, welcome to 50 Shades of Green.
Thank you so much, Phil. We're so glad to be here. Antonieta, it is amazing to have you join us here today. We get to spend a little bit of time talking about some really cool stuff that we did together, but I really want everyone to just start the conversation from, tell us a little bit about you. Tell us a little bit about Climate Power and Acción. What do you do? What are your goals for this year? Tell us a little bit about, so we have some great context on you and the organization.
Well, thank you, Angela. I think one of the privilege of doing this work is actually knowing new people like you. And I feel that after all that we have done together, we are very good amigas at this point. And so I feel really privileged and grateful for the work that we do. A little bit of me, as you can see, I was born in Chile, in Latin America, in Santiago. And all my life, I dedicated my professional life to journalism. I was a foreign correspondent, then Latina correspondent, and congressional and White House correspondent here in the United States. And after an extreme weather event that happened here where I live in Katy, Texas, I transitioned from working as a journalist to work as a communications strategist, focus on climate. And I am fortunate enough to work with Climate Power since 2020. I ran this specific project that is called Climate Power and Acción. Climate Power and Acción is a work done by and for Latinos. And it's basically, its objective is to lead the political narrative, the political climate narrative, and connect those dots for Latinos. So in my work, I had the privilege, of course, to work with organizations like the Climate Group and so many others to actually elevate the issues that are important for Latinos when it comes to climate and make the political connection there. Because when we talk about climate, it's not weather. We are not talking about el clima. We are talking about how this impacts our life, how extreme weather, for example, impacts our energy costs or housing or our local economies, etc. So a big part of this job is to make those connections.
I love it. I think what is so fascinating to me, and yes, after working on these two incredible events with you, we are forever amigas. And so just letting the world know, this is a wonderful opportunity for us to keep growing the work that you're doing and connecting it to the work that we're doing, but also just experimenting a little bit. And I say that in the sense that what you bring up is I think a really interesting question in so many different directions, right? Are we communicating to communities across the country about the importance of climate change in the best ways possible? Are we actively connecting, the politics of the world with, the impacts of climate change? And I think what you and Climate Power and Acción do so beautifully is sort of bringing all these threads together. And I think one of the things that we were really interested at the U.S. Climate Action Summit and focused on in our events is, connecting that public and private sector piece, but also being able to bring the incredible work that you're all doing to sort of a different audience, right? So tell us a little bit more about the events. What was your experience with the Leaders Forum and at the White House, and kind of what the opportunity here was for you?
Well, I cannot tell you enough, like how many people have approached me after both events and have shared, like, this is wonderful. It's great that you guys created this space along with the climate group, because it was a first one, honestly. And Angela, both of them, they were a first one. And I think that the key to the success, a lot of things. The first one, when we decided to do the Spanish Roundtable during the U.S. Climate Summit, and it was the first of its kind Spanish language, roundtable during the U.S. Climate Summit. And the fact that we decided to do that in Spanish, not only bring Latino leaders to the room, but actually do the event in Spanish, it shows, how much we value diversity. It shows inclusividad. So that was one of the first things, the first positive feedback that I have received personally. It was like, wow, we really recognize, that you two, Climate Power and the Climate Group, did this in Spanish. It's something great. I think the second is that whenever we talk about climate, like in general, we bring communications experts, we bring the Latino organizations that work on climate, etc. We bring the press. But having the business component, public sector and private sector together in the room, talking with all these Latino leaders working on climate, talking with the press, etc., it was the perfect combination, because that is the exact conversation that we need to have if we want to connect the dots of the impact that climate change is having on our daily lives. Of course, the business sector, that business conversation needs to be present. I mean, we are talking about local economies. We are talking about small, medium, and large businesses. We are talking about job creation. So all those components, I mean, how do you show the impact? I ask myself this question every day. How do you show the impact? Not only the impact that the extreme weather and climate change is having in our lives, but the impact of the clean energy economy, the impact of this green economy that we are creating. How do we show it on the real life? Because, we have discussed this so many times. We can talk all day to young Latinos and Latinas about, how this is great, how we have the clean energy plan and all these billions of dollars in investments. But people ask themselves, so why does it matter for me? Like, what change brings to my personal life, to my kids, to my community, to my job? So we are responsible to actually answer those questions. And I think both events were in part an effort of both organizations to actually help answer those questions.
Antonieta, I totally agree. And I think what was really interesting, so we have this first ever Spanish language roundtable, not just first ever for USCAS, not just first ever for Climate Group and Climate Week, but I think ever. It's a crazy thing to say, but we heard from so many members of the press and the people who were there that they had never found a space like this, right? So kudos to you also for joining in that effort and co-creating that, because I think it was really spectacular. But also, I think one thing you and I talked a lot about when we were thinking about this event was in Spanish language press, and I would love to hear your take, obviously, with your background as a journalist and now being on this side of things, the message that is coming through is loud and clear that climate change is happening. There's no question about the science, right? That, and in fact, people who are consuming information in Spanish language, they really are looking for experts at all levels to be talking about this issue in a really sophisticated and expertise way. And so what was really exciting for me also was to be able to think about bringing that public sector and private sector together at all levels, right? So we talked a bit about global trade and the impacts between countries all the way down to the storyteller who came to the table to talk about his individual experience in his community installing solar, right? And I think the idea was also that this economic conversation we need to have at all those levels, at that macro all the way to microeconomic. And until now, it really has been hard to find the right people in the right place and put them all together so that you could have that kind of holistic economic conversation. I think that was so interesting, so cool, because to your point, I think we're not convincing people in Spanish language necessarily that climate change is happening. They believe it, they're seeing it, they're a part of the change that's happening on the ground, but they really want to be a part of those solutions. So how does this positively impact? What's the opportunity for them in this transition to a clean economy? And I think that was also really exciting to see, was both the risk side of it and a really honest discussion about how the impacts were real and happening today, but also the opportunity. And I thought, even that got picked up in the White House roundtable to really look at that national scope with those leaders from the NGOs, but also from the private sector, as well as from government coming to the table and saying, look, this transition needs all of us, and how do we come together to ensure that that opportunity is front and center for the Latino community?
Exactly. And I think, Angela, also from the perspective of Latino media and Spanish media, people in general, organizations tend to underestimate the power of Latino media and the power of Spanish media. I mean, if you go through Univision or Telemundo, you and I, we both know this. If you go through Univision and Telemundo, you can reach millions of people. Like, it's amazing the power that it has. And now that it has expanded on their digital versions, etc., like, engaging Latino media has a lot of power. And people, unfortunately, fortunately for us, for most of them, they do not understand the power of Latino media. They do not understand also, like, the weaknesses of the industry. And you and I, we both know that, for example, a Latino reporter, they have to do a lot. Like, they have to cover immigration, education, jobs, all at the same time, because there is a capacity issue on the industry. So there is an opportunity for organizations like ours to talk to Latino media directly and help them, support them covering climate. I cannot tell you how much I hear from my former colleagues telling me, we want to cover more climate. We know climate is super relevant, for Latinos, etc., in different states around the country at the national level, but we just don't have the capacity. So how can we support them better to increase their coverage on climate issues related to Latinos is a big question. And I think part of the answer is specifically doing events like this, where Latino reporters can get access first to the information, and second to the leaders that are relevant to this conversation. So I do think that it has a lot of value to do events like this. And of course, like, we have discussed, like, post-event, the things that are coming up. Like, I think there should be some work that we need to do together, for example, to engage more foreign press, because as a Chilena, I can tell you, like, I have part of my family here in the United States, and my mom, she looks at Televisión Nacional de Chile or Canal 13, their digital version. So there is a piece that we need to do more with foreign press too, with Mexican press, with Colombian press, Venezuelan press, etc. So I think there is a lot of opportunity here. This is just the beginning.
Oh, absolutely. And I could not agree more. I think there's something also about looking at the way that the Latino community also takes in information. It's variable as there are people, right? And so whether it's information that travels through a diaspora of news, right, including, the kind of country connections that people have, I would also say a diversity of voices, right? They want to hear from the CEO who can speak in Spanish. I think one of the greatest comments I heard at the Spanish language roundtable was one of the press at the end being like, I don't have a question, but I'm just going to offer this comment that I had no idea what I needed until this moment right now, is like, that there is an IRA expert who can speak to me in Spanish on the record about the tax credits, right? You know what I mean? So it's sort of a niche thing, but at the same time, Latino communities who are receiving information in Spanish, they also have backgrounds in economics. They want to hear the sort of complex take on some of these issues, and to have those resources available to journalists, I think is really exciting and cool, because it just takes the level of conversation to another place. And I totally agree with you. I think what was really fun to work on this with you was like to imagine the possible, right? Like, it's like, why can't we have a person who can speak about the connections between, Chile and the United States and IRA, and then have someone who can also talk about on the ground and who can also speak about, state opportunities and initiatives. Like there's all these people out there. It's our job to go find them and to organize them and bring them forward.
And Angela, and we know also that one of the big obstacles we are facing this year, the big challenges, is the information gap. I mean,
Yes.
People they don't know what has happened on climate. They don't know that we had the most historic climate legislation ever passed in Congress a couple of years ago. And they don't know the impact, the positive impact that this legislation and the Clean Energy Plan in general is having on their lives. They don't know the legislation, they don't know what's on it, and they don't know how to use the benefits. And I was listening during the weekend to a Yale Climate Connection session where they talk about methane gas, because of course there is, as you know, in the Inflation Reduction Act, there is this possibility to get tax credits to actually change, for example, the stove that you have at home for an electric stove, and so many more benefits. So they were talking about methane gas. And one of the things that they highlighted was exactly that people don't know. They don't know that they have access to these tax credits, and they don't know the health benefits of doing that transition. So, I mean, I think organizations like mine, like yours, there is a lot of work to do when it comes to information. So as much as we can do, the better for the Latino community.
No, absolutely. I think it's so funny. It seems so obvious, right? But it's not, right? I think there's so much. And like you say, the climate conversation has so many angles and pieces, but this sort of pocketbook conversation that we have in English, I think, is absolutely true in a Latino community too. Like, hey, I want to know about the tax credits too, because I just want to sign up and I'd love to have a heat pump. Why not? Right? You know what I mean? That helps me reduce my bills. I can be better for the environment because I actually truly believe in the environment. We see, high levels of sort of fidelity with environmental issues within the Latino community. Like, that's a win-win for everybody. And so I think that's what's so exciting about it for me too, is just seeing that sort of click and be so easy, right? And so I do want to give you an opportunity though also. Can you tell us a little bit about like, what's next? Where do we go with this? And I have ideas too, obviously, but what are your key takeaways moving forward for Climate Power en Acción and just this year? I mean, it's going to be a very contentious year. And so what does that look like for you and where do we go from here?
It is an important year, and as I was saying before, I think the big challenge is the information gap. So how do we fill that gap? So we are doing different things, like we are doing these events, we are reaching out to Latino media, we are doing rapid response on climate, we are also engaging new voices. But I think an important part of the strategy this year and in the years to come is to engage local leaders, very specific local state leaders that are actually doing the work with the community, so we can distribute and elevate those voices and the information relevant to the Latino population in those areas. And during our meeting, for example, during the Spanish Roundtable, we had organizations. We had Elena from Chispa, for example, and she talked about, what is happening in Arizona and Nevada, specifically with the water crisis there. There are specific areas of climate that are impacting different populations in different geographic areas. So you can get much more granular with this. It's just a matter of capacity. It's just a matter of having the resources we need to actually elevate these issues and to just, of course, touch the different pieces of the puzzle that are important for this relevant conversation about the green economy. There is one piece about, the water crisis. There is another piece about air quality. For example, we are seeing in the news now the impacts of the fires in Canada. And unfortunately, we know this is just the beginning, because as we saw last year and the years before, climate fires are happening every summer. And the fact that they are longer, they stay for longer, and their damage is much worse is because of climate. So talking in a very granular level to what is impacting their lives in their specific geographic areas is something that, of course, we could do if we have the opportunity and the resources to do more.
Absolutely. I don't think I could say it any better. I think, Antonieta, one of the most brilliant things you brought to the table was also the diversity of news people, right? So we had a couple of really great influencers who were a part of the conversation, right? And I know this was your brainchild. So if you could spend just a minute talking about diversity of sources within the Latino community too, right? So obviously we were talking to Spanish language press, print and TV and radio, but there's also so much news being consumed on social media. And so tell us a little bit about that idea, because I think that's actually really very innovative opportunity here too.
Definitely, Angela. If we know something is that Latinos consume their news on social media. So one of the first resources that they have is YouTube. Also, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, etc. They are seeing their news on their phones. That's the reality and the world we live in. And of course, second, the traditional media that we all know and appreciate their work. And so what you are seeing right now is people that are influencing the conversation and are actually making a difference on the news cycle by their posts on social media. And a great example of that is, for example, Benjamin Zamora. We have him on the Spanish Roundtable. Benjamin is a reporter. He worked on Telemundo for many, many years as an anchor. And now he transitioned to being a full-time influencer because, of course, he has millions of followers in TikTok right now. And so that is a great example of how things are changing in the industry too. And we need to adapt to those changes. We need to understand them and adapt, because Latino audiences, you can reach them in different angles. In the time I was a reporter and when I was, a congressional and a White House correspondent, it was more traditional. I would say that I came to Washington and to the United States in el ocaso, in the dawn of the traditional journalism, where you had correspondents, in DC, filing news, daily news, etc. Now, with social media, that all changed. And you have a bi-directional conversation too that you didn't have before, because before, as a reporter, you posted your story and then you had some comments to the story, etc. But now with influencers, for example, what is happening is that they are also watching, the conversation, and they actually read the comments. Like we were talking with Carlos, we were talking with Christian and Benjamin when we had the roundtable at the White House. One of the first things they said is that, it's really hard to communicate climate because the terminology is so technical. So how do we communicate better? So there is a role also to play there on help them how to communicate better these issues so people can relate to them. And so that is another piece of the conversation and on the job that we need to do. But first, I think it's super important and relevant to understand the media landscape and how it's changing with social media.
Antonieta, I have 1,000 more questions, but what I want to make sure is that you and I go out there and make some more good trouble, and then you come back in the next few months and we talk more about this, because I think this is one of the most exciting and innovative places I've seen some folks doing stuff. And so, really congratulations to you for having such incredible start to this wonderful project. And we're just really excited to continue working with Climate Power and Acción and developing this. And I think we couldn't be doing this at a more critical time, right? The impact of climate change is here in many of the communities that we're looking to reach out to. Latinos on the coast, Latinos in the mountains, Latinos everywhere are being impacted. And so I also personally feel really invested in ensuring that, my community has access to information, like you said, and that we close that information gap and also create opportunities for communities across the country to really participate in this green transition.
From my side, congratulations to you. I mean, you were the strategic mind, and we know this. You were the strategic mind behind the White House meeting, and that wouldn't have happened without you. And so great kudos to you and the work that you do, and also to have the vision to believe in something like this. And it's so important to bring the business, the public and the private sector together to talk about this. And you were a powerful force in doing that. And so I deeply appreciate all the work and time you put on this project and for believing that this could happen and that it was worth the time and the effort.
Oh, Antonieta, thank you. Well, it was a mutual, and really, I'm going to warn everybody. We've now gotten started. We're not stopping anytime soon, so we're going to be back and doing lots more in this space. What would you like to share with everyone that we haven't covered yet?
Angela, you and I, we are both moms. By the way, happy belated Mother's Day.
Same to you.
Thank you. So I think we do this work for several reasons. And the reason I do this work is because I believe my community deserves better. And we know, like, Latinos have been at the front line of the climate crisis and on the environmental injustice that we have lived for so many, many, many years. But I also do this for a very selfish reason, which is my kids, because I want them to have a world where they can live and enjoy nature, a world where they are not exposed to pollution, and a world where their lives are not in danger. And climate touches every piece of this conversation and every piece of this future I see for my children. So I feel that one of my responsibilities as a mother is to do the best I can to actually fight for that. And in the world that I live here in Katy, Texas, Texas is a very big oil-oriented state, and many of the parents that we have at school, they work on big oil. So this, talking about this and being super outspoken on climate has brought some trouble personally here. But I will not stop at any time in the future. Angela, when I am old and I cannot move, I still will be fighting for this issue because it's so important, because it's so relevant, and there is so much work to do. And you don't realize, the big interest that is behind this fight. I mean, we are fighting corporations that have a lot of money and a lot of power to actually make us believe that it's okay to pollute our communities and we're fine and there is no issue here. That is unacceptable. I don't accept that, no lo acepto, and I will never accept that. For me, for my children, for the children of the people that are hearing us, we need to do something, and we need to do something now. So if I can give any message, is no matter the position you are, no matter what you do, there is something you can do to fight this, to fight climate change, to fight pollution. Find the way to do it, lose the fear, and join the fight.
Beautifully said. Antonieta, muchísimas gracias. This has been so much fun. But again, promise to come back. We will have much more to say. And thank you again.
Gracias a ti, Ángela.
Fresh off the heels of the first ever Climate and Health Day at the U.S. Climate Action Summit, we're exploring how the healthcare industry is reframing and building resilience for the connection between climate change and healthy lifestyles. Adam Lake joins with Seema Wadhwa, Executive Director of Environmental Stewardship for Kaiser Permanente, one of the largest healthcare providers in the U.S., for an in-depth conversation on climate and health and how this new dimension has shaped and will continue to impact the ways we address climate action. In November 2023, Seema was recognized as a Time 100 Most Influential Climate Leader, and under her leadership, Kaiser Permanente's office in Santa Rosa, California, became the country's first net zero medical facility. Adam and Seema, welcome to 50 Shades of Green.
Thanks so much, Phil, and great to see you, Seema. It feels like we speak quite a lot to each other at the moment.
Adam and Phil, thanks so much. Glad to be here, and good company I keep.
I think it's a bit of a sign in the direction of where things are going in climate, because when I joined Climate Group in 2018, health really wasn't a discussion that we had, and it feels like so much of what we look at, both at Climate Week NYC, but US Climate Action Summit earlier last month. Health is just becoming this massive thing that everyone's talking about. You're at Kaiser Permanente, so it's been a huge thing for you for a lot longer. So I'd love to hear, first of all, just a little bit of background about what you do at Kaiser Permanente, what your role is responsible for, and what maybe are the changes that you've seen over recent years and how this has become an issue that more people wanted to get invested in.
Great. Well, what a great question. And, Adam, I've been working at the intersection of healthcare, environment, climate, and health for about 15 years now. I'm a civil engineer before that, and I've kind of gone from building communities and roads to building healthier communities. And, the way that we do that at Kaiser Permanente really falls into key 3 strategic areas. The first one is focused on what we're doing to reduce our own footprint. So, the healthcare industry is a energy intensive industry. We create a lot of waste. We do we create a lot of impact, all in the effort of making people healthy. That being said, we still need to be aligned with our mission to support people's health, but we want to do it in a way that has the least amount of impact on our community in reducing our own emissions. The second part of the work we do is focused on supporting our patients and members when it comes to the impacts of climate. So, we're seeing it on a regular now, whether it is the fires in Santa Rosa that made us evacuate a hospital with a fire just across the street, or it is situations like we saw in Lahaina in Maui, where we unfortunately lost an entire clinic, or even, moving on from wildfires, situations similar to what we saw in the Pacific Northwest with this incredible heat dome and the multiple deaths that are associated with that extreme heat event. We know that we need to be prepared, and we are prepared to support our members and our patients in terms of how medicine is changing to address these challenges. And then the last part of our strategy is really around community resilience. How are we ensuring that we are actually building resilience in our communities? Whether that is working with organizations such as Love My Air Denver, where we're supporting them put air quality sensors on schools so the nurses can know when to be on the lookout for high asthma related cases, or on our medical clinics for that same purpose. So, there's a lot that we can do. Those are kind of the 3 ways we do that: taking care of our own operations, taking care of our members and patients, and really helping build resilience for the community. And, in all of that we do, we appreciate the role we have in bringing others along for the journey, learning from others, and really leveraging our voice and our network to drive change beyond our organization.
So we were at the US Climate Action Summit a few weeks back, and it was fantastic to partner with Kaiser Permanente and the National Academy of Medicine on the first ever Climate and Health Day at US Climate Action Summit. And it was a really, really awesome event. I mean, just so many fantastic speakers, really inspiring to hear about this, especially as from my point of view, someone who's relatively new in this space. I'd love to ask, what do you think the role of leadership plays in sort of creating this change, bringing together leaders from different areas? How much impact can that have in how healthcare organizations change what they're doing and do it in a better way?
Adam, I think that there's a couple ways to look at that. I think first, yes, there's opportunities for healthcare organizations to drive change in terms of their own footprint and really changing what we're doing. But I think the magic of that Climate and Health Day really was the opportunity to go beyond the healthcare industry. The healthcare industry makes up about 8% of U.S. greenhouse gas emissions. It's a sizable amount. But really, where we have the opportunity is to leverage our voice in putting health at the center of climate action for the other 92% of emissions out there. Oftentimes people still see climate change as something that is about polar bears and ice caps or about the planet. And, unfortunately, and to a certain degree, fortunately, people are seeing that climate change is not just about the environment. It's about the fact that we can't go outside because of wildfire smoke or it's too hot. Ultimately, we're seeing so many different pathways in which climate is impacting health, whether it's mental health or physical health. And that's where I think the real magic is, in that collaboration, radically thinking about not just, our own roles in our own organizations, but man, what can we do together to really drive change in a way that we need to, an accelerated path, but in a different way than we've been able to do before.
I guess there's a really big environmental justice angle to this as well, because those sort of health outcomes are probably not a level playing field for people. And I guess that's where the environmental justice movement came from originally. It was the fact that these impacts will be felt by communities who society just didn't treat equally at the time. Is that something that you've seen on your side of things?
Yeah, Adam, what's very clear is climate change is happening now. It's happening all across the world, including in Kaiser Permanente communities. It's impacting health, but it doesn't impact health in the same way for all people. People who have been traditionally marginalized, people of color, low-income communities, older adults, younger children, these are populations that are especially vulnerable to climate change. And not only are they especially vulnerable, they often get hit by, a multiplier that comes from climate change, whether that is they already have social vulnerabilities or health vulnerabilities. These are communities that are not equally being impacted from a health equity perspective. So, I think it's very fair to say health equity, environmental justice, climate justice, these are all very synonymous in terms of addressing some of the root causes.
When you look to the future, do you think that there are any organizations or groups that you're aware of that are doing a particularly good job at listening to communities and discovering where those disparities lie and how they can be counteracted?
That's a great question. I think there's a couple responses that come to my mind. I think one, there is a process where every nonprofit U.S. healthcare system does something called a community health needs assessment every 3 years. And this is mandated. And what that means is every 3 years, they have an opportunity to really listen to the community and understand what their challenges are. Now, that means that you have to be listening for the right things. And what comes from those listening sessions are the opportunities to develop implementation plans. And that can include environmental efforts. That's really one of the reasons that Kaiser Permanente is involved in this work, is because we're seeing our community's needs in these spaces. So that's one mechanism where that building in listening to communities exists. I think there's a lot more opportunity in terms of what questions are being asked in that process. And, I think there are some other great collaboratives that are doing some of this work. One I'll call out specifically is Business for Social Responsibility, and it's one that we're working with that is bringing together large organizations, Fortune 500 level companies, alongside with community-based organizations to co-design how we really move from understanding climate is a health issue to actioning on that. So, I think it's a real matter of not doing work for the community. It's doing work with the community, understanding how we can partner together.
At the Climate and Health Day, it really pressed upon me how, this sounds fairly naive, but just like how big and complex healthcare structures are in the US, naturally so. And actually, if you look at things like electric vehicles, like the amount of vehicles used within the healthcare system, if you found a way of electrifying those vehicles, or you're looking at built environment, the actual buildings are such a humongous part of emissions in the US and around the world. And it was actually great to see some case studies of some organizations that are doing really, really good work on this stuff. And I just sort of wonder, we speak a lot to different sectors, and one of the things we often reflect on is that, what are the roadblocks that stop people from doing more? And a lot of these things come from the government side. It might be things like permitting. It might be getting resources and getting funding. Do you feel the healthcare sector is sufficiently supported to take on these challenges and ambitions? And if you had a magic wand, what would make it easier for healthcare systems to transform at an even faster pace?
So Adam, what a brilliant question. In terms of, is the healthcare industry prepared? I think we're not. And I think it's because there are so many challenges the healthcare industry is dealing with. I think we're, still recovering from COVID. And, here we have cyber attacks, so many different things. So a lot of ways we're probably less prepared than other sectors. But our imperative is probably more urgent because we are feeling the downstream impacts of climate change today, in the here, in the now, with the patients at our doors. So, the other part of your question of what would be the magic wand? And, if I had a magic wand, it would really include an all of society call to action, to act more urgently when it comes to climate change. That means looking at things from a policy perspective, from an incentive perspective, from a financial perspective. And, we're starting to see some progress there. So, really excited that Health and Human Services, HHS, now has an office dedicated to climate change, health, and equity. Another great mechanism coming out of the Inflation Reduction Act. First time ever, there was a direct pay model, which for nonprofits that typically couldn't benefit from tax reductions, there are different mechanisms to have access to incentives. But ultimately, I think we're on the beginning of a journey where people understand more and more why this work is important. We've gotten to that point where I'm starting to see on a regular people talking about climate and health, and those people are not healthcare people. And so it's really now shifting the talk into action.
And I love that piece about communities and how we need to bring, all voices on board and put up a united front, which sort of nicely leads into my final question. We have launched a new health theme as part of the wider week of Climate Week NYC. And this is thankful to the great work we've done with people just like yourself as well, to really show why this is such an important thing, why this is such a big deal. Climate Week NYC is the largest climate event of its kind in the world. And it is because it brings together so many different hosts, so many different events, and so many different voices, from grassroots all the way up to CEOs, presidents, and all the rest of it. What I'd like to ask as my final question is, in terms of this health theme, the sort of 100+ events which will now take place as part of Climate Week NYC, what are the sorts of things that you would like to see discussed? What are the sorts of people that you would like to see coming together? What's your sort of ideal itinerary, I guess, for health as a new theme at Climate Week NYC?
Well, can I just pause for a moment and just share my excitement? It really was, I'm going to say nothing short of gleeful to hear that announcement and, to be part of these conversations. So, pausing for that recognition, I think what I'm super excited about now is that health doesn't sit in its own silo as a separate thing happening at Climate Week. So my aspiration is, for all of your listeners that are preparing for Climate Week, you might be thinking of what events to attend, or you might be planning your own events. Think about how health plays into your work. If you are in the EV space, how does health play into that? How does the fact that that cars and the exhaust really impact health, and how do you bring that into your conversation? I think partnering with people in the healthcare industry, whether they are health systems or they are notable physicians, nurses, clinicians, administrators, those who live and breathe this every day and can tell you firsthand what it's like to be on the front line of the climate and health receiving line, bring them to your conversation, include them, and be part of conversations that you may not have been part of before, to look at things through a new lens. And, I guess ultimately, I'm just a really strong believer in collaboration, in new collaborations, and what I'll say is radically collaborating with others. So I'm really excited to be part of that this year at Climate Week NYC.
Amazing. Well, I'm sure we will be bumping into each other at lots of events as part of the week. We're at time, Seema. We could have talked for hours and hours. So all that leads me to say is just a huge thanks for all the work that you do. And thank you for joining us on 50 Shades of Green today. As I mentioned, the health theme has been launched. People can register events as part of Climate Week NYC now. We launched last week, so please do check out the website if you want to get involved. But with that, thanks so much, Seema, Kaiser Permanente. Been great working with you.
Thanks so much, Adam, and to the Climate Group and Phil for hosting us today. And just also a lot of gratitude for this amazing community you've created. Can't wait to see everybody in New York.
Thanks again for tuning in, and a special shout out to our guests, Angela Barranco, Antonieta Cadiz Vargas, Adam Lake, and Seema Wadwa. Do you have climate questions? Submit your questions at climategroup.org, and our team will do our best to answer them in the next episode. Like this episode and subscribe on all major podcast platforms. Climate Group's 50 Shades of Green is available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, and Google. Stay well, and we'll see you next time.